Not long ago, these tool brands were everywhere on job sites, in garages, and at the top of shopping lists. Today, shoppers are walking right past them. Retailers are shrinking their shelf space, and some of these names are closer to disappearing than most people realize. In this video, we're breaking down 8 tool brands people are no longer buying, what caused the collapse in trust, and what that means before you spend your money. Let's start with some of the biggest names on this list. Tool 8. Craftsman. Once upon a time, Craftsman was the safe choice. If you didn't know much about tools, you bought Craftsman. If you did know tools, you still respected the brand. It was dependable, widely available, and backed by a reputation that felt bulletproof. Today, that reputation is doing most of the work because the brand itself no longer is. The biggest problem with Craftsman right now is identity collapse. The name is still familiar, but what it stands for has become unclear. Under one logo, you'll find tools made in different countries, built to different standards, priced across wildly different tiers, all sold side by side. For buyers, that creates hesitation. People don't mind paying more or less, but they do mind not knowing what they're getting. This confusion didn't happen overnight. After multiple ownership changes, Craftsman stopped behaving like a unified brand and started behaving like a label slapped across unrelated product lines. Some tools are fine for light home use, others feel noticeably cheaper than competitors at the same price, and a few premium attempts quietly disappeared, signaling that the brand may have pulled back from competing seriously at the higher end. That matters because tool buyers don't just buy one item, they buy into systems and trust. When shoppers can't predict quality from the name alone, they stop defaulting to it. They compare more, they hesitate. And many simply move on to brands that feel more consistent, even if they cost a little more. Retail behavior reflects this shift. Craftsman is still visible, but increasingly positioned as a convenience brand, not a destination brand. It's there because it fills space, not because it pulls customers in. That's a dangerous place for a legacy tool name to sit. For consumers, the takeaway is simple. Craftsman isn't dead, but it's no longer a safe blind buy. You can still find decent tools under the name, but only if you research the exact line and manage expectations. As a long-term system or serious use brand, it no longer commands automatic trust. That's why Craftsman lands at number 8, not extinct, but no longer the default. And once a brand loses that status, the decline is already underway. Tool 7. Porter Cable. Porter Cable is a textbook example of how a tool brand can fade out without ever making headlines. There was no scandal, no massive recall, no sudden collapse. Instead, the brand slowly lost relevance, while the market moved on without it. For years, Porter Cable occupied a comfortable space. It was a reliable mid-tier option that appealed to homeowners and light professional users. It wasn't flashy, but it felt safe. If someone owned Porter Cable tools, it didn't raise questions. That positioning worked until the tool industry fundamentally changed how people buy. The cordless revolution reshaped everything. Batteries stopped being accessories and became the foundation of buying decisions. Shoppers no longer evaluated tools individually, they evaluated ecosystems. The question became whether a brand looked committed to supporting a platform for years to come. That's where Porter Cable fell behind. As competitors aggressively expanded their cordless lineups, Porter Cable's development slowed. New tool releases became rare. Battery options stayed limited. The ecosystem never grew in a way that reassured buyers they were making a long-term investment. Even if the existing tools worked fine, the future felt uncertain. That uncertainty is deadly in this category. Buyers don't like guessing whether replacement batteries will still be sold in 5 years or whether new tools will ever be added to the platform. When a brand doesn't clearly signal growth, shoppers assume stagnation and they move on. Retail behavior reinforces that perception. Porter Cable tools have steadily lost shelf space, often shifting to online-only listings or smaller in-store footprints. To buyers, that signals reduced confidence from retailers themselves. And once a brand stops being visible, it stops being considered. The end result isn't outrage, it's indifference. Porter Cable isn't heavily criticized because people aren't talking about it at all. It's simply not part of the conversation anymore. And in a market driven by systems and future planning, being ignored is often worse than being disliked. For existing owners, this doesn't mean immediate trouble. The tools still function. But for new buyers, especially those considering cordless platforms, the risk feels unnecessary. There are too many alternatives that show clearer commitment and ongoing investment. Porter Cable hasn't disappeared yet, but it has slipped out of buyer planning. And once a brand is no longer part of how people plan their purchases, the road back becomes very narrow. And when uncertainty isn't just about product momentum, but about the financial stability of the company behind the brand, the risk to buyers becomes even harder to ignore. Tool 6. GearWrench. GearWrench is one of those brands that confuses buyers because on the surface, nothing looks wrong. The tools themselves are generally well-liked. Ratchets feel good. Sockets perform as expected. Among mechanics, the name still carries a certain level of respect. But the problem with GearWrench isn't what's in your hand, it's what's happening above the brand. GearWrench sits under Apex Tool Group. And over the past few years, the conversation around Apex hasn't been about innovation or expansion. It's been about debt, restructuring, and financial pressure. When buyers start hearing more about lenders and restructuring than new products, confidence erodes even if the tools are fine. Most consumers don't track corporate finance closely, but they feel the effects indirectly. Product launches slow down, marketing gets quieter, retail strategy becomes conservative. Over time, the brand stops feeling like it's building towards something and starts feeling like it's being maintained. That perception matters a lot in hand tools, where buyers expect consistency over decades. People don't just want a ratchet. They want to know that 10 years from now, replacements, matching sets, and warranty support will still exist. When the parent company's future feels uncertain, buyers hesitate to commit. Another subtle issue is brand overlap. Apex owns multiple hand tool brands that compete in similar categories. When resources get tight, consumers worry about which brands will be prioritized and which ones might be quietly trimmed back. Even if that never happens, the possibility alone is enough to push cautious buyers toward alternatives with clearer long-term stability. As a result, GearWrench has started to shift in how it's perceived. It's no longer a brand people build entire tool collections around. Instead, it's treated as a buy-a-piece-if-you-like-it brand. That's a downgrade in status. And once that shift happens, sales momentum becomes much harder to maintain. For someone who already owns GearWrench tools, there's no immediate red flag. The tools work, the quality is acceptable, but for new buyers planning a long-term setup, hesitation has crept in, and hesitation is deadly in a crowded market. GearWrench isn't collapsing, but it's standing on ground that feels less stable than it used to, and when buyers sense that instability, even subtly, they start looking for safer bets. And if financial uncertainty at the parent company level can shake confidence, the risk becomes even clearer when a brand's future depends almost entirely on decisions made by a single retailer. Tool 5. Crescent. Crescent is one of those brands almost everyone recognizes, even if they haven't bought one in years. Adjustable wrenches made the name famous, and for a long time, that legacy carried real weight. The problem is that recognition alone doesn't keep a tool brand alive. Today, Crescent suffers from brand drift. The name still exists, but what it represents has become blurry. It's no longer clearly premium, but it's not confidently budget either. For buyers, that lack of definition creates friction when someone can't immediately tell where a brand sits in terms of quality and value. They hesitate, and hesitation usually ends with choosing something else. Like GearWrench, Crescent also lives under the Apex Tool Group umbrella, which ties its future to the same corporate uncertainty. Even if consumers don't follow ownership details closely, they notice the symptoms. Fewer standout launches, less excitement around new products, a sense that the brand is being maintained rather than actively grown. Another issue is competition. The hand tool space is brutally crowded, and many competitors have become extremely clear about who they're for. Some brands scream durability, others lean hard into value. Crescent, by comparison, feels quiet and undecided. That's dangerous in a market where clarity drives buying decisions. Retail placement reflects this shift. Crescent tools still appear on shelves, but rarely as the centerpiece. They're often surrounded by brands that communicate their purpose more directly. Over time, that changes how shoppers perceive value. The tools might still be perfectly usable, but they don't feel like a confident choice anymore. For consumers, this creates a subtle but important shift in behavior. People stop building collections around Crescent. Instead, they might pick up a single wrench if the price is right, but they don't commit. And once a brand becomes occasional rather than intentional, long-term momentum starts to fade. Crescent isn't disappearing tomorrow, but it's increasingly surviving on history rather than direction. And in tools, history alone rarely carries a brand forward. And when a brand's identity depends not on its own strategy, but on the priorities of a single retailer, that uncertainty becomes even harder for buyers to ignore. Tool 4. Kobalt. Kobalt's situation is different from the others so far, but that doesn't make it safer, it makes it more unpredictable. Kobalt is a house brand. Its future isn't driven by independent demand or broad market presence. It's tied almost entirely to one retailer's strategy. As long as that retailer believes the brand supports its goals, Kobalt survives. If priorities shift, the brand can change direction or disappear fast. That dependency creates hesitation for buyers. At times, Kobalt looks like it's being pushed toward a more serious, pro-adjacent role. At other times, it feels firmly positioned as a mid-tier alternative meant to fill shelf space between budget and premium brands. Those shifts aren't always communicated clearly, and buyers notice. When a tool brand's direction feels fluid, people hesitate to commit long-term. Cordless platforms amplify this concern. Buying into Kobalt often means locking yourself into one store for tools, batteries, replacements, and support. For some buyers, that's fine. For others, it feels like unnecessary risk, especially when competing platforms are sold across multiple retailers and show clearer long-term investment. There's also the issue of continuity. House brands can pivot quickly. Lines get refreshed, rebranded, or quietly retired. When that happens, compatibility questions start creeping in. Will this battery still matter in 5 years? Will this tool line expand or stall? Buyers don't need definitive answers. They just need enough doubt to choose something else. That's exactly what's been happening. Kobalt isn't being rejected outright. It's being treated cautiously. People buy individual tools, but fewer are committing to full systems unless the value is extremely clear in the moment. If this breakdown is helping you avoid buying into uncertain tool platforms, hit like and subscribe. You'll get more straight-to-the-point guides like this. Kobalt isn't on the brink because of quality alone. It's on the brink because its fate isn't fully its own. And when shoppers sense that a brand's future depends on decisions made far above the tool aisle, many decide not to gamble. And that uncertainty grows even sharper when a brand doesn't just depend on a retailer, but struggles to hold shelf space at all in an overcrowded entry-level market. Tool 3. Skil. Skil sits in one of the most unforgiving positions in the entire tool market: entry-level power tools. This is where brands live or die based on visibility, confidence, and momentum. And right now, Skil is struggling on all three. At a glance, Skil should be doing fine. The brand is recognizable, pricing is usually competitive, and the tools are aimed squarely at homeowners and casual DIY users. But that same space has become brutally crowded. Nearly every major retailer now carries multiple budget to mid-range options, many of them backed by much louder marketing and clearer platform messaging. That's where Skil starts to fade. For buyers walking into a store, Skil often doesn't stand out. The packaging doesn't clearly communicate why it's a better choice than the tool sitting right next to it. The cordless ecosystem doesn't feel expansive enough to signal long-term commitment. And when shelf space is limited, brands that don't pull customers in get quietly pushed aside. Retail behavior reflects this. Skil tools appear inconsistently across locations, sometimes heavily discounted, sometimes missing altogether. That inconsistency creates doubt. Shoppers start wondering whether the brand is being supported long-term or just rotated through as a temporary option. Confidence also took a hit when battery-related issues entered the conversation. Even when problems are addressed, entry-level buyers are especially sensitive to anything that suggests inconvenience, risk, or replacement hassle. At this tier, people want tools that feel simple and safe, not something they need to think about. As a result, Skil has become a brand people consider briefly, then pass over, not because it's unusable, but because it doesn't feel like the safest or clearest choice anymore. And in a crowded aisle, clarity wins. For consumers, the implication is important. Buying into a budget cordless platform only makes sense if you believe the brand will still be easy to find, easy to support, and easy to expand later. When that confidence isn't there, even a good price isn't enough. Skil isn't gone, but it's fighting for attention in a space where attention is everything. And brands that lose that fight rarely get it back. Rehook to next chapter. And when a brand's survival isn't just about competition, but about whether its entire distribution network can stay afloat, the risk to buyers becomes far more immediate. Tool 2. Silverline. Silverline's problem isn't that people suddenly decided the tools were unusable, it's that buyers lost confidence in whether the brand would even be there after the purchase. Silverline has long lived in the value end of the market, especially in the UK and parts of Europe. It built its presence on affordability, wide distribution, and the assumption that if something went wrong, replacements and support would be easy enough to get. That assumption is exactly what started to break. When a brand's distribution and supply chain come under stress, the impact is immediate and visible. Shelves thin out. Online listings fluctuate. Some items are available one week and gone the next. For buyers, that instability triggers a simple question. If I need this again, will it still exist? That question is deadly for tools. Tool buyers accept budget limitations, but they don't accept uncertainty. They want to know that consumables, accessories, and replacements won't become a scavenger hunt. When distribution weakens, even decent tools feel like a risk. Another issue is trust spillover. When news circulates about supplier or distributor trouble, it doesn't stay neatly separated from the brand in the consumer's mind. Shoppers don't distinguish between corporate structure and product reality. They just know something feels unstable, and instability pushes them toward safer alternatives. Retailers react quickly to that perception. When supply looks unreliable, they reduce commitment. Less shelf space leads to fewer sales, which leads to even less shelf space. It becomes a loop that's hard to break, especially for brands that compete primarily on price. For consumers, the takeaway is caution. Buying Silverline tools now often feels like buying clearance without the clearance label. That can make sense for one-off purchases, but it's a risky move if you're thinking long-term or building a set you expect to maintain. Silverline's situation shows how fast things can change when the issue isn't quality or demand, but whether the brand can reliably stay in the market at all. Re-hook to next chapter. And when a brand shares that same distribution pipeline, the uncertainty doesn't stop at one name, it spreads to everything connected to it. Tool 1. Triton. Triton's problem isn't performance, it's continuity. For years, Triton built a reputation around specialized woodworking and workshop tools. It attracted a specific kind of buyer, someone who wanted something a little more niche, a little more purpose-built, and different from the mainstream big-box options. That worked as long as the brand felt stable and reachable. What changed wasn't the tools, it was everything around them. When a brand depends heavily on a single distribution pipeline, any disruption hits harder and faster. Availability becomes inconsistent. Certain models disappear without explanation. Accessories and consumables turn into question marks. And once buyers sense that unpredictability, confidence drops immediately. Tool buyers don't like surprises after checkout. Even if a Triton tool does exactly what it's supposed to do, people hesitate when they're unsure about future support. Will replacement parts still be stocked? Will warranty claims be handled smoothly? Will the tool even still be sold next year? These aren't dramatic questions, but they're enough to stop a purchase. There's also a psychological shift that happens when a brand feels in limbo. Shoppers stop recommending it. Retailers stop promoting it. Online discussion slows. And once that ecosystem goes quiet, the brand starts feeling invisible, even if it technically still exists. For current owners, the response is usually defensive. People hold on to what they have and quietly stock spare parts or consumables when they can. That behavior alone tells you something important. Buyers are planning around the brand instead of with it. For new buyers, Triton increasingly feels like a gamble, not because the tools are bad, but because the future feels uncertain. And in a market full of alternatives that feel stable, that uncertainty is often enough to push people elsewhere. Triton's situation shows how quickly a brand can slide toward the edge when support structures weaken. You don't need a mass exodus of customers, just enough doubt to stop new ones from coming in. Rehook to final chapter. And when all of these warning signs, lost trust, stalled platforms, retailer control, and fragile distribution show up in one brand at the same time, the fall becomes impossible to ignore. What all of these brands have in common isn't bad tools, it's broken confidence. Some stopped evolving while the market moved on. Others became trapped by corporate debt, retailer control, or fragile distribution. In a few cases, the tools still work just fine, but the future of the brand no longer feels reliable enough for buyers to commit. And that's the real takeaway here. Most people don't abandon tool brands because of one failure. They leave when the signals start stacking up shrinking shelf space, stalled platforms, unclear direction, or uncertainty about long-term support. Once that doubt creeps in, buyers quietly choose safer bets, and sales dry up without much noise. If this video did its job, you now know what to look for before you buy, not just in these brands, but in any tool brand you're considering. Momentum matters, stability matters, and clarity matters more than nostalgia. If you want more breakdowns like this clear, practical, and built to save you money, make sure you're subscribed.